Hey guys, it's Charlene. Today I'm going to be showing you some fun ways on how to use your stencils unexpectedly. So here you can see this is the first card that we're going to make, and you're going to be surprised about how easy it is to do. And here is the second card, really pretty. I'm going to start off by showing you what we're using. We're going to be using the brand new Dynamic Duo Hanging Houseplants stamps and layering stencils. These are from Altenew. And you can see here the packaging is going to give you step-by-step instructions on how to use these stencils. So let's jump in. You can see here I have a Copic Multiliner, and what I'm doing is I'm actually going in and I am outlining all of the stencils. So I'm coming in here with the Multiliner, tracing around the outside portion of the pots, and now I'm going to come in and do all the leaves. So this is really easy to do. You just run your Multiliner or whatever type of marker you're using along the edge. I am going to be Copic coloring these, so I'm using the Multiliner because I know that it will work well with the alcohol inks, but it's super simple. So this is going to give you the look of a hand-drawn image without actually having to hand draw anything. I'm not terribly great at hand drawing things, so I love that this gives me the look of something being hand drawn without all of the struggle and work to hand draw it myself. So if you have any type of stencils in your stash, you can use this technique. You also can use this technique with an embossing ink pen and do heat embossing. Lots of different options. So just remember that you don't always have to use a product as it was specifically intended. Now, like I said, I'm going to be doing Copic coloring on all of these, but there's lots of other things you could do with this outline technique. You could watercolor. You also could outline in a light gray in order to do a no-line coloring kind of technique. You could go in with colored pencils and Gamsol. Whatever type of medium you like to color, you could use it to color with this outline technique. You even could go back in and put the stencils on top and color with a water-based dye ink, but then you would still have your black outline. I'm using a rainbow theme here. So for my first plant, I've got R14 and I've blended that into YR16 on the pot. For the second pot, I am using Y06, YG03, and G07. And then for the last pot, I'm using some BG05, V12, and V15. So I start from the left, flick the color in with my Copic marker, then take the new color and flick it in from the right. And I just go back and forth, blending those until I'm happy with how they are mixing together. For the first plant, for the leaves, I'm using YG03, G14, and G07. And I just wanted to point out here with the coloring, I'm using different colors for the leaves for each plant, and this will give kind of more interest to your card. Certainly you could use the same colors for all of your leaves, but I was kind of thinking how these leaves look in real life and trying to mimic that, making some leaves brighter and kind of more shiny looking by having more of a highlight like this first set, versus the middle plant, which I'm doing a little bit darker and not making as much of a highlight on it. And you'll notice for my second plant that when I did my outlining, I'm actually a little bit far to the right in the plant pot, but at the end of the day, it will not matter at all. It's really not noticeable. You probably didn't even notice until I pointed it out, but I noticed when I was doing it. But I had come too far. So by the end of the card though, it looked great. So I just wanted to point that out for you as well, because not everything has to line up perfectly. Oftentimes, once you have put everything that you want into a card, whatever that thing was that wasn't lined up exactly where it needed to be will no longer be noticeable. So for that middle plant for the leaves, I used YG17 and G28. And now for the leaves on this third plant, I'm using some YG23 and YG63 and just blending those two together. So now that I've got the different leaves colored, you can see that just adds a lot more variety and interest on the card to have those multiple different colors. And this set is really cute because you can use the plants by themselves, or you can use the stamps that come along with it. And the stamps that come along with it are actually meant to look like the kind of macrame plant holders that you would use for plants that you have hanging down from the ceiling. So it's your call if you want to use them or not. You could put this so it looks like these plants are sitting on a shelf, and that would look equally awesome. I'm going to go ahead and stamp out the different plant holders here, and I'm going to use some VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. This is a black pigment ink. It's my favorite black pigment ink. I use this all the time. I frequently use it to stamp sentiments just because I feel like it stamps really nice and crisp looking, and it also gives you really solid coverage. Because it is a pigment ink, it also stays wet for longer, which makes it really easy to heat emboss with some clear embossing powder and add a little bit of extra shine to your sentiment. I'm not doing that here, but I'm just coming in and stamping the plant holders. So you will notice that the plant holders kind of extend a little bit past the pots on each side. So you do want to be careful when you are lining the stamp up with the image to stamp over it, because you want to make sure that the stamped image covers the whole front of the pot and isn't going over too far one way or the other. Also included in the set is this string stamp. So no matter what length you want to make the plants on your card, you can just use this length of what's supposed to look like string and go ahead and stamp it so that it goes up the top portion of your card. You also could stagger the plants, and I think that would look really nice as well. But once I have that stamped, I can come in with my sentiment. This is the Encouraging Sentiments die set, and it coordinates with the Encouraging Sentiments hot foil plates. I really like this die set and foil set because it also has the option of cutting out sentiments in cardstock, which is really nice. And then you can do them in combination with foil or without. I've used it before in a previous video. So I'm going to glue this whole front down to an A2 size card base. I also wanted to point out on my die cut sentiment that I did make those 2 layers. So I glued 2 layers of cardstock together before I glued those onto my card front. And there's that finished card. I added just a little bit of bling to add something. Now I'm going to come in and I'm going to use the stencil in the way in which it was intended. And I'm starting out here with some Sprout ink. And this works particularly well to use a couple of different colors of inks on the leaves. So for the second layer, I'm going to use some Pearfection. And then coming in here for the next layer, I'm using some Field, which is an even darker green. So I kind of went light, medium, and then dark. And then I came back with Fairway for the 4th layer. And that's yet another shade of green. It's a little bit more of a true green. For my pot, I decided to come in with some Distress Oxides. So I'm starting out with some picked raspberry, and I'm just going to color the whole pot with that. And then I'm going to bring in a little bit of Festive berries, and I'm going to use that to sort of shade the bottom of the pot. Now, I do like to use dye inks as well as oxides, which are considered a hybrid, and I like to use them in combination sometimes on my cards. I think it just gives a very interesting look. So now you can see here, I'm using a little bit of Post-it tape to mask off the edges of the pot before I stamp the holder portion. And that's just because I really wanted to make sure that there was a nice crisp edge on this pot, especially because I had done it in Distress Oxide and then I was stamping with pigment ink. I didn't want there to be any kind of strange change in the way that the ink looked, and I think it worked out really well. This made it so it was real clean on those edges, on the edges of the pot. So you can see there I peeled it off and it looks awesome. Now you could leave this as is, but I wanted to add a couple of layers to the card and just make it a little bit more interesting. So before I stamp my sentiment, I know I'm going to be cutting this out with the Ornate Nesting Die Set. And so I'm going to line up my sentiment so I can make sure it's where I want it when I cut out that whole image. Again, stamping it out with some black pigment ink. And then once I let it dry just a little bit, I can go in and die cut that. I also die cut a frame in black by using 2 of the Ornate Nesting dies and taping them together. And now I'm going to glue that frame around the first piece that I cut out with our lovely stenciled image and the sentiment. So this is just kind of a little bit different. I knew I was also going to use this gorgeous bright pink die cut that I had done with one of the larger Ornate Nesting dies. So that way when I brought in this black and white piece with everything, it would really pop. Now I did want to come in and I brought in my Copic brush multiliner and I went all the way around the edges, and that's just going to make it so when you look at the side of the card, you don't see any of that white peeking out. Now all I have to do is glue this down on the front of my card and add a few jewels here and there to add a little bit of bling. I hope you guys will let me know down in the comments below if you've used the stencil outline technique before, what you think of it, how you used it, what mediums you used with it. I always love to hear what everybody is up to out in that crafty world out there. All right, guys, that finishes off my card. I hope you picked up some tips and tricks today, and I hope that you'll like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so that way I can keep bringing you crafty content in the future. Until next time, happy crafting.